Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this unfortunately delayed meeting of the Council's Audit and Accounts Committee. I'm the chair of the committee, Steve Willoughby, and I'd firstly like to apologise to all those watching the live stream for the delay, 45-minute delay in starting this meeting. We've had a lot of technical problems this morning, both with the live stream and also with bringing in people in the meeting as well, but I do apologise. On the call of members of this committee who are councillors, we have Councillor West, we have Councillor Adrian Pegg, we have an external members, Philip Stewart and Philip Sunderland, we have Councillor Hardy Dinsel, Councillor Joanna West, Councillor Lucy Kerr, Councillor Miles Patterson, Councillor Paul Bettany, and Councillor Shiraz Khan, plus in attendance we have the relevant cabinet member, Councillor Nicola Ralston. So without any further delay, I just want to say that we've got a full complement of the committee, but are there any apologies at all?
I have no apologies, Chair.
Fine, okay then. So there's no late items to be introduced by the Chair. Does anyone have any declarations of interest at all? No, fine, okay. Then there's the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held back in July. Just quickly, has anybody got any issues to raise on those at all? We are going to come to any outstanding matters under agenda item 5, bearing that in mind. So anybody got any issues at all? Okay, so we'll take those as a sort of true and sort of accurate record of the meeting then.
Move that.
Okay, brilliant. That's good then. So that's number 4. So next one then is item 5, and this is outstanding, looking at the progress on outstanding resolutions of the committee. I don't know if you just want to go through those. I've got some contribution to make on one of them, but I don't know if you wanted to just run through those at all, Richard. Richard Bowden, who's the head of internal audit.
Thank you, Chair. Item 1 on the 5th of February 2020, we've got the coroners report. Now I know Alex has got an update on that he's going to give to the meeting.
I don't need to go on mute. Right. So Alex, if you want to just say that now then. You there, Alex? You're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, apologies, was just resolving the final remaining technical gremlins that we were experiencing. But yes, councillors appointed to the committee last year will recall provide an update on the implementation of the audit recommendations relating to the coroner's service back in February. Despite a delay in convening a planned meeting with counterparts at the County Council owing to the pandemic since then, I do have some positive progress to report following the last update. Just to provide some background for those councillors who haven't previously been party to the discussion around the coroner service. The coroner service for Derbyshire is administered by the County Council, and costs incurred by the Derbyshire coroner are invoiced to the City Council twice a year. We currently contribute 25% of the costs towards the coroner service, which is based on the proportion of Derby's population to that of the county. Statutorily, local authorities are obliged to fund coroner services to the senior coroner's satisfaction. Now, that presents a challenge for councils who have limited control over the spending of coroners. The Coroners and Justice Act 2009 requires the relevant authority for a coroner area to provide whatever officers and other staff are needed by the coroners for that area to carry out their functions, and also premises that are appropriate to the needs of those coroners. And now, whilst local coroners must provide the county council with an account of all allowances, fees and expenses, neither councils can review the local coroner's performance, enforce practices, procedure or policy, or invoke any sort of measures to ensure probity in decision making, I suppose. Coroners answer to the Chief Coroner, the Ministry of Justice, and ultimately the Lord Chancellor. So as reported to the committee in February, the costs associated with the coroner service have risen sharply since 2015-16. In that period, there's been a £261,000 per annum increase in the amount the City Council contributes to the coroner service. That's a rise of around 70%. The majority of this overspend is comprised of increasing costs for pay and allowances, which represents around 45% of total expenditure. And national trends such as suggest large increases in body transportation costs, toxicology and histology, and assistant coroner fees are contributing to the rising costs of coroner services across the country. A severe shortage of pathologists is also a significant concern for the NHS. Digital scanning to conduct post-mortems does offer a solution, but few trusts have either the equipment or trained staff available to use that equipment. In addition to that, additional costs have been incurred this financial year owing to the need to identify additional mortuary capacity as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. That's estimated at around £80,000. So the audit findings we received around a little over 12 months ago now raised a number of concerns related to the approval of payments issued by the County Council to the City Council, namely that we've been unable to demonstrate that payments were made in accordance with a formal agreement and that sufficient information has been provided by the County Council to analyse increasing costs. There were some substantial efforts to locate the agreement between the councils internally at both the City Council and the County Council. However, they have been unfortunately unsuccessful. And it is assumed that the split was agreed when Derby City Council gained unitary status back in 1997. The audit findings, as you'll note, recommend that a future agreement with the County Council should set out the right to review and challenge the costs allocated, an assurance that the County Council have adequate arrangements for budgetary control and probity, and a commitment to provide sufficient information and explanatory detail to support the payment of invoices in future. As I mentioned to the committee previously, we did have initial difficulty convening a meeting with counterparts of the County Council owing to substantial staff turnover and sickness absence in the department that deals with the coroner service. However, in the new year, Paul Simpson raised the issue with the County Council's Director of Finance, and further investigations were carried out by the county to identify the original agreement. As I mentioned, these attempts were unfortunately unsuccessful, so it was therefore agreed for us to hold a meeting to discuss a shared approach to administering the recharge. It wasn't possible to convene that meeting during the lockdown period as officers involved were understandably busy with other duties, but we were able to hold a meeting with counterparts at the County Council in early August, which was attended by Simon Riley, Emily Feeden, Pete Shilcock from Finance and myself on behalf of the City Council. At that meeting, we're pleased to be informed that County Council had taken various steps to ensure greater oversight of the coroner in recent months, including the appointment of a coroner services manager, whilst also insisting on greater transparency and input on any procurement that was undertaken by the coroner. We stressed at that meeting that Derby City Council wants to be treated as a key stakeholder in the coroner service, and our expectation was that we would also be directly involved in any value for money challenge that was issued to the coroner in future. At that meeting, pleased to report that an in-principle agreement was reached to maintain the existing share of costs based on population split, but with an option to review in due course once more data was available from a recently introduced case management system. We also agreed an information sharing arrangement, which would include quarterly update reports submitted to the County Council leadership team being routinely shared with colleagues at the City Council. The establishment of a twice yearly Coroners Governance Board, which is to be established between counterparts at the City and County Councils to look at trends and provide an advance warning of future budget pressures. Invoices that are submitted to the City Council to be submitted with an accompanying narrative to detail any notable increase in costs for any individual subjective lines, so we're better placed to analyse the areas of the coroner spending which have seen the greatest increase. We're also establishing regular liaison outside of these scheduled meetings between counterparts in our corporate finance teams. We're also going to be party to an annual joint review meeting between the councils and the senior coroner, so that will provide an opportunity for the senior coroner to provide us with some detail about why costs are increasing. Also the Derbyshire County Council's Coroner Services Manager has made a commitment to share updates from regional meetings of those involved in administering coroner services with us as a City Council. Finally, there is also an agreement that any investment proposals will be shared with the City Council before any spending commitment is made. Emily Feenen and I are working to draft the agreement reached at that August meeting into a formalised legal document, and we anticipate this will be signed off at the first meeting of the newly created Coroners Governance Board, and I hope that will ensure the audit recommendations can be considered as complete. The committee's previously resolved to write to the LGA in relation to supporting a review of best practice in relation to coroner services. This has yet to be completed. However, we intend to draft this letter on behalf of the chair of this committee once we have gained a bit of a better understanding from our counterparts at the County Council about the broader trends affecting coroner services, rather than those specific issues raised by the audit with regards to the relationship between the two councils. As you'll appreciate, none of us at the City Council are subject experts in the work of the coroner, and we just require a little bit more detail from the coroner and from our counterparts at the County Council in order to make sure that that letter is as accurate as possible, I suppose. So that's my update, Chair, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members of the committee? Just a reminder, if you want to ask a question, just to put that in the chat, and then I'll obviously call you in order. So are there any questions at all? I think Councillor Kerr wanted to say something.
I was just going to say, I think that's a really helpful statement. There sounds as though there's been some really good work going on in the background, and you'll no doubt take it through to its conclusions as you've described. Is it possible for that statement to be included as an appendix to the minutes when they're published?
Yeah, I mean that formalised statement isn't that information sharing agreement hasn't been. Sorry, the statement I delivered or the information sharing agreement that we're agreeing with the County Council. The
statement you've just delivered as an update, which was full of facts.
I'm happy to circulate that to to members of the committee. Yeah, not a problem at all.
Right, thanks very much, Alex, for the update. Hopefully that will close it off. I don't think there's any other any other questions from committee members. So do you want to just carry on with summarising the previous resolutions, Richard? Or
I will do, Chair, yes. Sinfin Waste Plant, myself and one of my colleagues are meeting on a monthly basis with the lead officer on that, so that's ongoing. One of the things that committee asked for was an update on the shared lives audit to be brought to the next committee meeting, which we then suggested for September. The 3 outstanding recommendations aren't due to be implemented until today. So given that they've had issues as well with the team having been transferred and the key officers getting to grips with all of this, I thought we'd do an update as part of the internal audit update that comes to the November meeting, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Fine, yeah.
Other items on there around training, development and things like that are all being picked up later on the agenda following the committee's self-assessment. Then there's 2 other key issues on there that you'll need to consider now, Chair. One being the item that was raised during contract waivers at the last meeting on the Christmas decorations in the marketplace, and the second one is the you asked to call in the outstanding fixed assets 2018-19 audit assignment, and Jane Salby-Warrington is here to answer questions on that.
Shall we deal with that one first, because the second item will be myself and the Vice Chair. So if you want to bring in Jane first, then she can, waiting patiently, she can dial off.
Good morning.
Morning, yeah. So it's just to give us an update on why these are sort of late and what's been happening on them, what progress has been happening on them, Jane.
Yeah, no problem, Chair. Unfortunately, I think as we're all aware, there has been a delay in agreeing the audit recommendations and management responses that were originally put forward from our internal audit colleagues. I think there was 8 recommendations put forward, 6 of which rest with myself in terms of property, and 2 which rest with finance colleagues. We have had a series of meetings, and I'm going to talk pre-COVID for now. So we had a series of meetings in January, February and March of this year in order to progress matters. Unfortunately, as we all know, COVID hit back in March. I was redeployed and still is redeployed with a couple of other members of my team, and the focus of our service did shift into securing buildings and making sure that any newly vacated buildings from service areas were secured and looked after. So a bit of a focus on the shift of service, and also during March to September, it is quite a time of looking at the 1920 asset valuation programme as well. What I will say is to give committee some assurance and hopefully some positive assurance, we have been working with internal audit colleagues who have been absolutely brilliant, actually. I would like that on record. And we are close to agreeing those recommendations and management actions. And I'm confident by mid-October we will have reached that conclusion with internal audit colleagues, and they will be able to get their final report out to Simon as our Strategic Director of Corporate Resources. So I hope that helps give a bit of background, Chair.
Thank you, Sue. I'm hoping, Barrett, I'm sorry, I think it's as if my picture, my camera is frozen, so I'm not going to faff around and sort it, as long as you can still hear me, I think, and you have seen.
Yes, I can.
I think I've frozen for some reason on the picture of me sat here. So basically you're saying like the middle of October that it should be a final closeout on that then, basically, I think what you're saying.
Yeah, we are working on them. A couple of implementation dates have changed until the 9th of October. So we are making progress, we are working with them. And it is one of our key priorities now, now that the 1920 asset valuation programme, I guess it's almost over the line. It is a key priority for us to work with internal colleagues in order to get that completed. So yeah, hopefully we'll say mid-October.
Thanks very much. Any other questions from committee members at all on that and the update that's been given? No? Okay, well thank you. So the other one is myself, and obviously at the last meeting we had a discussion on the position with the contract waivers, and particularly where there was a rather large one waiver made for purchasing the Christmas, some aspects of the Christmas decorations that were in the Market Square in Christmas last year and Christmas last year, sort of 2019. So I had a meeting with the people, and sort of the Vice Chair myself have had various sort of ongoing discussions with them. So what I can do is read out some of the key points just for the members of the committee and other people, and then what we'll do is we'll get Steve to circulate this round of committee members afterwards, and what we found out about it, and if there's anything extra you'd like to find out, then please come in afterwards as well. Basically there was a vision for Christmas in Derby was developed by the Council's Cultural Service area around the concept of Christmas past, present and future. The vision being developed for the Council's Christmas offer was based on the Christmas Carol by Dickens. It was first discussed in February 2018 and was developed by officers in the Cultural Service and supported by the Christmas Working Group. The idea was to build on this over a number of years, hence the Christmas present idea is part of the present element of this vision. A variety of options were considered by the Christmas Working Group, such as a large lit bauble that people could walk through and take selfies/photographs of. However, the option that best met the vision of the past, present and future was the large presents option that was chosen, that we all saw, of course. This cross-service Christmas Working Group continues to meet regularly, but is developing plans for Christmas. The existing Christmas decoration supplier was contacted in relation to whether they could put suitable Christmas decorations in the marketplace, as this was the area to be represented as Christmas present. However, the options that could be provided by this existing company did not fit requirements. The lights and tree aspects and maintenance of the Christmas decorations were procured from this company in 2018. A Google search was conducted to research companies supplying Christmas installations such as giant presents and a large bauble, one of the options being considered. And eventually the UK #1 Christmas decoration supplier was approached via an inquiry, as the council had seen that they had an extensive offer of Christmas decorations being supplied around the world. The inquiry was to see if they could provide something that fitted in with the vision. The Christmas decoration concept they offered was unique, and the company providing them was the first in Europe to provide this kind of technology and synchronised light and music to this type of decoration. Hence they were selected to provide this bespoke product, as it was available from only one source at that time. The duration of the contract is for 2 years to supply, install, store and provide elements of maintenance for the bespoke presents. The procurement and management of the contract is through colleagues in the Property Services Department. So therefore, a procurement approval form and waiver are completed for this company. Procurement have agreed the process followed is approved for these circumstances. As they were the only company with the required technology, it's thought there was no need to look further. Other options were not considered from this point, as the council was confident this company could deliver something to fit this vision. Hence the waiver was raised to allow the council to do this. Procurement thought this paperwork was appropriate. Procurement costs were in line with the waiver of sort of £175,000. The process that was followed was compliant, as Rule 7.2 is the rule that colleagues sought approval to waive using the council's procedure to do so. And in terms of regard shown to the various contract procedure, Rule 56, particularly 56.1 and 56.3, specialist expertise was required for a bespoke product available with only one source, and approvals were granted as appropriate. So therefore I suggested that it would have been helpful if the options considered from the Google search and justification when a formal tender to other suppliers due to the uniqueness of the product were documented and retained as records to support the waiver, and generally, particularly on the grounds that the Christmas presents are a significant expenditure, so are likely to be subject to further scrutinies. Indeed they have, because it came to light at the last meeting of this committee, of course. So they said that the justification for no formal tender to other suppliers due to the uniqueness of the product, they're saying that had been documented and retained as record on the waiver following discussions about the options and subsequent decision by the Christmas working group. So that was the outcome of our meeting. You know, that was sort of pulled together those notes from various comments and questions in response to various questions that, of course, we raised at the meeting itself. So does anybody have any comments at all on that, or want to clarify further? So Councillor West.
Thanks, Chair. Not entirely sure what's happening there. Just a couple of follow-ups, really. Just to say that I thought the explanations that we got from Claire and Mags were quite helpful, and I think answered the questions that the committee had. The things to follow up, and the things that I know we've discussed but I suppose need to be recorded, are that it's quite disappointing that if this was first mentioned in February 2018, that a waiver needed to be sought in the first place, and that there wasn't any linking in with other organisations in the city, especially when Derby Theatre did A Christmas Carol last year as their main performance, which features very clearly the themes of Christmas past, present and future. That would have been really good to link in, and I know that Derby Theatre and Sarah Brigham did bring that up on Twitter last year, that they were disappointed they hadn't been consulted. I'd also hope that there won't be any similar waivers going forward. If there is a theme that's been agreed, and we had these issues last year, that I sincerely hope that there won't be any further waivers coming to the committee on the similar items going forward. That was all, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Any other comments? As I say, we will circulate that, and hopefully Steve will put that précis I can send to him with the minutes, of course, as well. Any other comments at all? And I've turned the camera on and off, and I'm back now, so that's good. Any other comments? So good, we can move on from that, and I think there's nothing more on item 5. So let me just close that down. Let's move on. What we're going to do is to take the next 3 items sort of in reverse order, because they sort of follow on logically. That we look at the annual government statement, then we look at the ISA 260 letter from the external auditors, and then we discuss the actual accounts and financial statements. So I think it's key to point out, why I'm taking in reverse order, that the key for us as a committee in terms of the financial statements is that ISA 260 letter from the external auditors, because we can look through the accounts, we can comment on the accounts, but the key, and we can even disagree with what's in the accounts, as is our right, and whether my money was spent in one area but not in the other. But, you know, for us as a committee, the key thing for us is those accountments are a true reflection and that they are a true statement of fact. And the external auditor's job is to give us that assurance and to assure that they've done their job, to give us assurance that they've done their job properly, for us to say that there are a statement of fact. And then at various other forums, of course, we can debate why money was spent in particular areas and sort of maybe factor that into future budgets. So that's really, as I see it, and why I see that ISA 260 letter as key. So let's move on first to the annual governance statement, and I think that's you presenting that, Richard.
No, it's me, Chair Simon Riley.
Brilliant.
So, thank you. The annual governance statement is a requirement for the committee to consider to be published alongside the statement of accounts. And what the annual governance statement does is to look at the governance framework that operated over the past year against the principles set out in the Sit for Solace guidance of, I think it's 2016. That sets out good principles of transparency, purpose, vision, and everything else. And they're detailed really in the pages about 4 to 15 of the appendix, which is the annual governance statement. There's then a requirement to say how that was effective and where you sought your assurances from. And as a committee, you seek your assurances from statutory officers, but also some of the frameworks that we have in place, such as the Project Management Office and other frameworks. The annual governance statement looks at the priorities that you identified last year that needed to have a focus in the, or this time last year that needed to have a focus in the year. And they're detailed towards the end of the report. And then it's important that we, from that learning and from that review, sort of look at the factors that we might think need a focus in the forthcoming year in 2021. And they're detailed in the tables at the back of the report. It was important this year that we also carried out an assessment of the impact on our governance framework of the coronavirus pandemic. So on page 19, there's a section which talks about how we responded in line with our frameworks of business continuity plans, how we promoted democracy, how we sort of sought assurances about the operation of our internal control and assurance framework in that time. So the sign-off for this is that the head of paid service, Paul Simpson, and the leader of the council are required to sign this off. And pending any observations or comments from the committee today, I will be requesting them to sign it off to be published alongside the sort of annual governance statement, annual statement of accounts, sorry. So rather than go through page by page, I'm happy to take any questions on the report, Chair.
Then that would be the best approach. Thank you very much for that, Simon. So we've Councillor Kerr, you want to sort of ask a question. So Councillor Kerr, over to you.
Is Joanna before me?
Mine was at the previous item, Lucy.
Okay, thank you. I've got 4 points that I wanted to, well, ask questions on or highlight. The first one is about the governance structure shown on page 4, where we've got a governance working group, and I'm not aware of who the governance working group consists of and what its ongoing purpose is or specific purpose. Now, I just wondered if you could say something about that.
Yeah, the governance working group is that internally is we have a statutory officers group of the Section 151 officer, head of paid service, Section 151 officer, head of internal audit, and the CIRO, just who meet on a sort of probably about every 2 months to consider things relating to corporate governance. So it is an officer group that rather than a members group.
Okay, thanks for that. On page 8 was my next question, and this isn't so much a question as an observation, and maybe one of the things that we need to be more aware of in the coming year. Under Principle B, ensuring openness and comprehensive stakeholder engagement, and number 1, openness. It says we are committed to openness and publish information online in accordance with the provisions of Local Government Transparency Code, etc. We've got a number of projects working between ourselves and Nottingham County Council, and it's been highlighted by some of our stakeholder groups that Nottingham is far more willing to put up information onto their website, for example, of bids to government or for plans as they are being developed, than Derby is. And in fact, in some cases, there have even been links from members of those groups have been given links to the Nottingham website for Derby information, because it's a joint project, the information is up there as well. And I think that actually shows us in a poor light in terms of our openness, and I think it's something that maybe the governance working group should be considering about our openness and how forthcoming we can be in a consultative way, particularly as post-COVID we are trying to engage more closely with our population and encourage dialogue. So that's what I hope can be taken forward as a work in progress.
Okay, thank you for that comment, Councillor Kerr. We are compliant with the Local Government Transparency Code, but I think the wider issue is our records management and our disclosure on the website of all available information where we can. Is it consistent? Is it logical? So in the next year, we'll be looking at whether we can go beyond the Transparency Code in respect of some of our records management of people being able to self-serve that type of information.
I don't think we should feel ourselves limited by what we are required to do. I think we should look at what it is helpful to do, and helpful from the perspective of the public.
I think that is what I was implying, that we are consistent with the code, but we want to go beyond the code, and that will include the lens that you've just set out to us, Councillor Kerr.
That would be excellent, thank you. On page 10, I'm sorry, this is a pretty dry document, and I'm not quite sure who the audience is and whether they enjoy reading it. But on principle D, there is the D1, the penultimate bullet point, is gobbledygook to me. Active executive scrutiny performance, forward plan focused on council scorecard, council plan outcomes. I don't even know quite how to read it, and I don't know if Google could either. Can you read it in a way that is meaningful to us all?
Yes. And I did create this dry document. This is in addition to exec scrutiny reviewing the cabinet forward plan, it also has its own work plan. And what this is trying to say is that that work plan should consider the scrutiny priorities for the coming year that they might want to do more depth inquiries or reviews into.
So just read it to me in a way that gets its meaning across.
So exec scrutiny or overview or executive scrutiny undertake a sort of
no. I just want these words here with the right emphasis, and so that the grammar works for me.
Okay.
Don't worry.
I'd probably correct it to exec scrutiny has a work plan that they discharge during the financial year.
Okay, let's maybe edit that one at your leisure.
Okay.
And I think that makes sense then, doesn't it, for what Councillor Kerr said?
Yeah.
And then my final point is something which is actually quite interesting, because when we had the original agenda sent out to us, this came after some of the other papers from Ernst Young letter to us, for example, because in external audit on page 16.4, external audit, it refers to the latest annual letter being the 1819 letter, and clearly in the schedule for this meeting we would have already considered the 1920 letter, and that made this paragraph seem out of date. But as we're reviewing it in the opposite order, this paragraph may now be accurate, which is, I think, a philosophical point that we could debate. But I just wondering whether we ought to be updating it.
I think I'm sure what Simon says, but they should be alongside each other, really, shouldn't they?
This is a annual governance statement for the 1920 financial year. As Stephen Clark from Ernst & Young will say, at the moment he has not issued his audit opinion, and he'll state that it's nearly there, but until that is a point, then I have to work on the latest audit opinion, which has been issued formally. So that is why it relates to the assessment for the 18-19 financial year.
Okay, I accept that. Thank you.
Councillor Kerr, thank you. So the next bit then is, Stuart Green wanted to ask, but he said he'd always covered what he wanted to ask Councillor Kerr, so we can move on. Any other questions or comments on the annual governance statement from members of the committee at all? So are we all okay to, if anybody, we won't take a vote each time, we'll just everybody speak up, and then if anybody is in disagreement we'll then take a vote, but is everybody okay with recommendations 2.1 and 2.2 then on the paper?
I'm okay with a minor amendment to that bullet point that I raised.
Councillor Kerr to English, but I think it does present a good picture, I think, of what the council's stuff over the year. So thanks very much for that. So if we're all okay to take that one forward, then if we can move on to the next item, which is the ISA 260 audit letter, and hopefully Ernst & Young are still on the call, so we'll hand over to Steve Clark.
Hi, Chairman. Can I just check people can hear me okay?
Oh, I can hear you fine, thank you.
Yeah, can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this is, it's not our final version of the ISA 260, but it's an as-is version, and we're probably a good 80% of the way through the audit, at least. Clearly, it's written at a point in time, so when it was issued, some of the things that were still outstanding will have been resolved. But I'll take you through those. Clearly, many thanks to Simon and his team for working with us. It's been a slightly more challenging audit than normal in the sense of just finding ways of working, which does lead to some delays on both sides. But I think we've broadly done pretty well across that. So what I'll do is I'll focus on the executive summary, and I won't go into the detail just because I'll let you ask questions and give the time in the meeting. So in terms of our materiality, that hasn't changed since the basis of planning materiality. It's in effect 1% of gross revenue, and then what we call performance materiality is 50% of that overall number, which comes to 3.25 million. That's the same basis of prior years. We don't believe that there's any further. That's at the lower end of the range that we would use, and therefore we haven't felt the need to move it as a result of issues in relation to COVID. Status of the audit is listed there on page 5 of the document. Probably the key things for members just to be aware that are outstanding are not in any particular order. Firstly, we've just got some valuation queries, particularly in respect of the silk mill and the use of a grant in respect of that, whether that should be capitalised and on the balance sheet or not. And we've got a particular issue in respect of Chequers Market and valuation. That, given a particular offer that has gone into that, we will conclude those issues shortly when we get information back from the council. The other main area of work to conclude on is in respect of the pensions audit. Now, we've had our assumptions back, and obviously the council have done their own assumptions. The pensions audit for Derbyshire County has not concluded yet, and we rely on the work of the pensions auditor to provide us with assurance, principally over the asset base and input base of the numbers that go into that, and therefore we can't conclude on that area until we receive those assurances. I'm trying to think. I don't know. Simon may have a date when they may come through, but I wouldn't think they'll be in until towards the end of October. We then just have to do some final work on PFI assessment and housing benefits reconciliation, and then the other major area which is very specifically COVID related. And much more involved than the prior year, which is driven both specifically because of results of COVID, but also because of a change in the going concern standard. The revised going concern standard, auditing standard, is how we assess that going concern basis. We have, so therefore we have to go through a consultation process before issuing our opinion. That tends to add something around 2 weeks to the tail end of the audit, and has to be done right at the end, almost up to the point of signing, which is why it extends the period of signing. There has been changing guidance, both from the ICAW and SIPA, in respect of how we consider valuations. So up until now, there's been quite a number of what we would call material uncertainties and consultations required on the basis of valuations. Those are not predetermined as certain now, and therefore, in the context of the amount of assets that we've got valued at, principally investment value, I consider that relatively low risk. So I wouldn't anticipate the audit opinion having an emphasis of matter in that respect. Going concern equally has been a bit of a moving picture, whereas for all the audit firms and at the point of planning, there was an assumed emphasis of matter that was going to go in respect of the going concern based assessment. That's now changed. As a result of more recent guidance, we need to look at 2 key things. So one is reserves levels and kind of balance sheet strength at the moment in time, and the second is liquidity, which is cash to you and I in layperson's terms. What we require is a very robust assessment by the council on 12 months cash flow forecasts, which are linked to the sources of funding from the point of signing, not from the point of the 31st of March, but from the point of signing, and that's a requirement of the auditing standard. And we're working with the council to obtain those. Should we be able to obtain those, we will conclude on whether or not we need an emphasis of matter in respect of going concern. But we need that information, and that's key. That is a much more involved process and requirement than it was in the prior year. Moving on from the status, I think the other key area then is principally around around value for money. Oh, actually no, yeah, hold on. Value for money. We flagged a risk in respect of the Austin CQC inspection, and with a potential for an accept for opinion, which is what this the document says at the moment. We're still in discussion with the council to identify if there is any further evidence, which will mean that is not required. We will conclude on that shortly. We had a good meeting with Andy Smith yesterday to discuss that in some detail. But to set the expectation for members at this point, we're still awaiting the evidence, and I would not assume that it will be removed, rather than assume it will be removed would be the best way I would put it. We've identified a number of audit differences, which we identify following page, and they've been adjusted for appropriately, and we're happy with what's happened on that. And in respect of any other reporting requirements that we have, we've got nothing else that we need to bring to your attention at this point. So I will call a halt there and take any questions, Chair.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that. Now, just a question from me first, because obviously you refer to, particularly in your status of the audit, we've substantially completed our audit, but obviously, and as you'll see yourself highlighted there were a number of outstanding issues. And bear in mind my comment, right at the start of introducing these 3 items that are interrelated. The importance of this work to give us as a committee members that assurance that the council's accounts financial statement is accurate and expression a true reflection. In your opinion, can we really sort of sign off the accounts at this meeting? Can we really accept them, given that this letter from yourself, this report from yourself, highlights a number of key outstanding issues, and what are the risks of those outstanding issues? Just value your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are some potentially material areas there. So the issue in respect of the valuation, particularly in respect of the silt mill, would be material to the accounts, and there is a complete unknown in respect of if there is anything coming out of the pensions assets work, or any material uncertainty that the auditor identifies within those accounts as a result of the valuation basis for those pensions assets. I think it's very difficult for you to give a cast iron, yes, you totally approve them at this point in time. It may be that you approve them at the current point in time, but they need further approval once those items have been closed off, because they are potentially material and they could change. Equally, we know that there are further going concern disclosures which will be required in the accounts from this point in time.
Well, thanks for that. I'm just going to bring in, because it's relevant to this, I'm just going to bring in Simon Riley before I take the question. Simon.
Okay, well, thank you, Stephen and Bath for Ernst & Young, and I agree it's been a unique year in terms of having to discharge the audit, and I think our teams have worked well together to try and resolve queries. Maybe just to give a bit of comfort to members, the key disclosure here that we are still awaiting and could materially change is obviously the pension fund audit, that we're reliant on Derbyshire auditors. The valuation queries, as a council, we have made representations, and we've also facilitated a meeting early this week with a district valuer who undertakes those, and the district valuer has responded, and that's been shared with Ernst & Young now, so hopefully we can resolve those quite quickly. Ernst & Young have highlighted the additional regulatory disclosures around going concern, and maybe just to again reassure members that we have provided our 12-month cash flow to Ernst & Young. I've done a statement of going concern to Ernst & Young, and those judgments of the balance sheet strength and liquidity, there may be a bit of nuancing, but the information has been shared, and I'm hopeful that we can come to a conclusion on that quite quickly. So all the other amendments that were found through the audit are detailed by Stephen on that executive summary and have been amended in the accounts that we have put in front of you and will be going through later. The next committee item does talk about, effectively, given that an opinion cannot be issued at this point, that it's seeking delegation to myself and the chair, or we're going to add the chair into that delegation to, in a sense, take into account any of those findings that are found post this committee date. But from my view, and I think probably also, I hope from Ernst & Young's view, the audit is substantively complete. Assurances have been provided, and we're trying to just make sure that the regulatory requirements, especially in this strange year, and the evidence provided is robust to allow Ernst & Young to, in a sense, seek their regulatory approval as well. I don't know if you want to add to that, Stephen.
Come back on this at this stage, Steve, at all.
Yeah, no, I think, Sam, that's a very fair position. I think that the points that we've talked about are the potential moving parts, but I don't think they're moving. That they're only going to move so far and are quite specific. And I mean, probably the one thing will be if something really unusual came out of pensions audit, which we're completely not cited, but is probably the one thing which is none of us are cited on. But in terms of the going concern basis, the basis that we've got the questions on the valuations, those are the moving parts. Completely agree, and there's nothing else material which is kicking around which could move.
Thanks for that. I think it's worth mentioning to members of the committee, though, that, and I'm sure Simon will clarify this, that the statutory deadline for submission of the accounts obviously is normally by the end of July, so they're rushing to do this at a meeting at the end of July. It's actually November the 30th this year because of the COVID. It's been delayed, so that's the statutory deadline of November the 30th. And it's worth mentioning as well that we do have a further meeting of this committee before then, in early November. So, without making the council fail to meet its statutory deadline, we could actually, if we want to just get clarity on some of these outstanding points, we could actually defer approval of these until that meeting. But at this point, with that in mind, I'd still like to obviously give members a chance to ask questions and maybe clarify some points in this and maybe make some suggestions. So I've got a number of people wanting to ask questions. So I'll first of all bring you in, Councillor Kerr. Thank you.
Thank you. And I start by saying that I feel that despite all the COVID challenges, the council and the external auditors have been working together well. There seems to be it just seems to be a good relationship in trying to resolve all the issues that need to be achieved, and everything's going in the right direction. So I find that very reassuring. I've just got 3 points I wanted to raise as a result of the audit letter. The first one is regarding the comments on page 6 regarding the risks associated with partnership working. And this isn't directly related to what you've got here, but the direction that the Health and Wellbeing Board is moving at the moment is into becoming a closer working between Derby and Derbyshire, which would obviously mean that there was more partnership working than we have at the moment. From that board's perspective, it's quite helpful because it works very closely with the NHS, and the NHS bodies aren't coterminous with the council boundaries. And I just wondered if you had any comments about what we should be mindful of going down that route, or if there are particular things that we should be wary of doing and going too far.
Yeah, I've got no particular specifics. Clearly, the whole way in which the health economies are working with sustainable care systems, etc., continues along the working with third parties theme, and it's an emerging picture. So there's lots of things happening across the country in many different ways. I think the point we make here is a very specific point in respect of a regulatory report that you've got. This is the challenge that we have, and just to remind members, our opinion can only runs from the 1st of April 19 to the 31st of March 20. We understand and acknowledge the work that the council has undertaken in respect of this area following this, but we've got to conclude specifically on that period. It's a bit of a binary basis for concluding, and we know that the council has done quite a lot in this area since this report, and the report was probably, to be fair, kind of said what the council probably expected it to say in some respects. An issue we've got then to deal with is we've got a regulatory report which comes out with a number of significant areas of weakness, and how do we then interpret those in the context of our opinion, which is quite different, I think, Councillor Kerr, from your more broader working with third parties. I think the point about working with third parties is, and this is the challenge, is the extent to which when you do that, clearly you've got statutory requirements as a public body, as do the health bodies, and it's trying to make sure that you're clear on those statutory requirements in terms of how that works, because sometimes you might think you're doing the right thing, but you may get criticised across those statutory requirements, even though there's so much you can do. And equally, sometimes working with third parties can mean that there's only so much you can effect as a one of those parties.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. I think it's putting it into that wider context is good. Secondly, on the discussion about the waste plant on page 15, you're talking about whether we capitalise or not the work that we've been doing as that and what the results would be. And there's a sentence in there which I'm just looking for again, which I'm afraid I couldn't get as to what you were trying to get to and where not we should be.
So should I try and explain what we're saying there, if that's okay, Councillor?
Yes, that's fine.
So at the moment you've capitalised £2.9 million worth of cost, which you have undertaken in respect of work on the waste plant. Clearly, depending what happens on that, at the moment we concur with your judgment, that the council judgment that would be capital works. What we flag is that should the site not progress, or should a different decision being made in respect of that, it is possible that 2.9 million may need to get written off to revenue at a future point in time as the nature of the scheme has changed. But at this moment in time, we are comfortable with capitalising it.
Okay. I'm not a Prince 2 expert in any way, but the training I did on Prince 2, one of the key messages that I got from it was that if a project gets to a point where actually it's not worth continuing, it is completely valid for that project to be ended. And this seems to me a good example of that, and therefore it's okay to have capital spend on something that goes nowhere. Or is Prince 2 in conflict with accounting principles in this instance?
I don't think they're necessarily in conflict with it. It's the point at which you could have made a judgment to have written off that cost. Now that could have been the alternative judgment you could have come to, but may then find that you can't write back that cost once you've written it off. That's not allowed under accounting standards, and therefore you might have written off something you didn't need to, and you could have spread it over the period of the plan. Clearly, if nothing happens and the project goes nowhere, then the nature of the cost would be abortive, and you would write that off. Yeah. So I don't think necessarily they're in conflict necessarily, but you're quite right to point out that we have done quite a lot of work, and we'll continue to do a lot of work from a value for money perspective with the stage process that both councils are going through in terms of the decision making. It is going. It's still got quite a long way to go in terms of where this goes progression wise, and we're very mindful of that in terms of that process. We're comfortable with the process that the council has in place to make those decisions, and therefore at this moment in time we're equally comfortable that this is capital in nature. It's also, just to to note that it's below our materiality level as well. So it's of lesser order. If this was 29 million and 2.9 million, then I think that's a slightly different question. And clearly, as the council goes on with spend, that will become a bigger and broader question.
Okay, and my final question is again exploring this capital revenue spend, and it's really a question about where we have capital receipts and we choose to spend, are we allowed to choose to spend that money on revenue activity? And how does the money, which it is only money, change from having a capital label to having a revenue label and being used from our general reserves in support of our revenue activity?
Principally, it comes if you've got a capital direction, and Simon might be able to be more specific about that with the context of the Derby. But typically, if you seek and get approved a capital direction that you can use capital receipts for revenue, you are allowed to use them. Simon, I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit more.
I was going to come back to this in our accounts question as well, so
yes,
given the time, maybe pick it up there.
Fundamentally, capital receipts are used for capital purposes unless directed otherwise, Councillor Kerr. But the government did introduce a flexibility which we haven't exercised. I think it was in about 2014 that you could use capital receipts to support transformational activity. But we have not got that direction. People like Northamptonshire did, and they got caught. In respect of how they were using it and not being able to evidence it. So I think the government will give more of that flexibility as we respond to COVID, if I've got to be honest, because I think we've got to look at that boundary and the capital revenue usage as councils going forward, but it's not there at the moment, Councillor Chair.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thanks very much for that. I've got Councillor West next.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, I guess, but firstly, I have to say that I'm really quite disappointed that we didn't get this documentation sent out to us until Friday. So everything else was sent out on the Wednesday, a week before the meeting, to give committee members time to read the documents. Indeed, I have the paper copy of the documents, and the Ernst Young documentation isn't in it because it was received late. It's a fairly long report to read online and to ask people to read online and to ask people to read with less than a week's notice. So I am fairly happy with what you said earlier, Chair, actually, that we don't have to make a decision on this until November because of the government, whatever the word I wanted. I'm unconvinced that the external auditors adequately considered the Assembly Rooms spending fiasco. There's a fairly minor point on page 25 of the report that relates to that. But realistically, my suggestion would be in relation to item 6, the recommendations on item 6, to approve the audited financial statement subject to outcome of the pension audit and to delegate authority for final approval to Strategic Director of Corporate Resources, be amended to bring this back to our meeting on the 4th of November to give members sufficient time to consider all the detail therein and to consider the pension audit documentation that will be submitted to us later. But I have to say, when we're paying more than £250,000 to Ernst Young, it's really disappointing to get this paperwork late. Thank you, Chair.
Any comments on that at all?
Yeah. I mean, I'm afraid that the nature of the timing of these audits means that you will not get the papers typically in with as long an order as we would all like, because we're working in real time. And that is the nature of dealing with it, and because we're working hard to get this through on an ongoing basis. I appreciate that you want to get as much size of the papers as you can, but it is just unrealistic to in terms of our ability to progress the audit sufficiently far. We could have got this paper out to you 5-6 days before, but it would be much more full of holes than it currently is. So you've got a decision to make. We could write it, but it would be much less meaningful.
The amount of errors that feature in the report, Stephen, as they did last year, which we picked up as a committee, I'd suggest that having it 5 or 6 days earlier wouldn't have made a great deal of difference.
Okay, well, given I know where we were 5 or 6 days before, I don't think we'd have been able to have concluded, to have been as clear in our conclusions as we are today. It's the nature of the trade-off with the external audit and the way it reports.
Okay. Is that your questions, Councillor? Have you got any more questions? Or?
No, that's all.
What we'll do is
Chairman, if I could just pick up on the comment around the assembly rooms, actually, we have considered that in quite a lot of detail. We are content that the way in which the council has approached the spend and halted the project was the right thing to do, and therefore we make no further comment at this point.
Yeah, Chair, I have indicated to speak, if I may.
So Karen, is it on the assembly? I've actually got Councillor Dinser who wanted to. I've actually got Stuart Green and then Councillor Dinser wanted to sort of came in before you. Is that okay? On the assembly?
That's fine, no problem.
Yeah, thank you. So if I could bring in Stuart Green next then, and then as I say, I've got Councillor Dinser, then Councillor Khan. Unless anybody wants to make any pressing other questions, I propose to wrap it up after those questions. Thank you. So Stuart Green next then.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thanks to Stephen for his verbal report, and indeed the work that he and his colleagues have done here under undoubtedly pretty difficult circumstances. My first question or point was really about those circumstances. This is something that Councillor Kerr has mentioned and alluded to in one of her points. I welcome the good relationships that Councillor Kerr got the feeling that there were effective working relationships between the auditors and the senior officers. I presume that most, if not all, of this work has been done remotely. One of
every bit of it's been done remotely.
Everything. Okay. One of the real
we have no teams on site, nor do we. It just in the context will. Is there any team from EY on any audit site anywhere? And that's pretty much the same for any audit firm.
Okay. Yeah, indeed. I've heard other audit firms in other audit committees of which I'm a member have reported much the same, Stephen. One of the real intuitive and softer ways to get a feel for a control environment is to actually be there on site and to see what's going on and to hear what's being said, how people relate to each other, how people relate to you as an external auditor. My first point or question was, what compensatory work was done to make up for that, the lack of face-to-face interaction and the lack of actually being on the ground at the organisation?
Yeah.
My second question, if I may, Chair, was regarding the changes in the Chief Financial Officer post. Now, Simon, you'll forgive me, you and I haven't met before. I have no doubts whatsoever that Simon, Don, and forgive me, Paul Simpson are nothing other than consummate professionals. But nevertheless, a sizable turnover in that post during the year possibly creates a risk. I'm just wondering if Stephen had a view on that and the extent to which it's informed the opinion that is expressed.
Okay, so I'll take your first point. So yes, you're quite right to point out that working remotely has presented us and finance teams with a number of challenges, some of which are frankly hugely beneficial, and I expect they will stay. And I would doubt that we would ever go back to working with lots of days of teams locked on site in a big audit room. I just don't think it's going to be necessary. Equally, you do lose something in the translation, as you've said. So there's a number of things that we had to do. So in terms of getting evidence of what we call information provided by the entity, IPE. So instead of looking over someone's shoulder as they run a report to check that the report that they're giving you is what has been run from the system they're saying it is, what we've had to do is share screens, take screenshots of that activity actually happening, because that's a requirement of the ICE, or the auditing standards. No standards have changed as a result of this. It's what they are. So we've had to seek alternative procedures to do that. That can be a little more time consuming. It means that the audit needs to be better planned. Clearly as well, both our team and Simon's team, during the time, particularly during particularly the more harder time of lockdown when there was no one in the office, or very few people in the office, their working hours and arrangements had to change. They may have been having to share childcare arrangements, etc., or elderly person care arrangements, etc., and therefore you can't just go wandering along to someone's desk and ask them a question. So it has to be much more planned back. That can cause probably a bit of delay both ways in answering and responding to questions, and that's probably the case to do so. And clearly, when we get out of this, given that I expect by the time we shouldn't assume that this will all be well and good once we get out of this and we'll be back to where we were, because I don't think we will. In terms of the control environment, clearly the other thing that we've done is to link with internal audit to understand if there's, we don't per se rely on the controls that are in place, because we substantively test and use a lot of analytics work. So actually that's quite helpful, because that would be more difficult to gain the level of assurance we need. Clearly, though, we link with internal audit and are mindful of what they say to understand if there has been any fundamental breakdown in financial controls or in areas of the council which drive the financial statements, which would lead us to cast more doubt on the information that we presented. And as with many councils, that has not been the case. Absolutely. And then equally, the other thing which we must be mindful of is both the council's policy in respect of working from home and our staff's own, EY's own guidance in terms of working from home. And so, for example, and that has changed during the period. So, our offices opened back up on the whatever it was of September, first week of September, but as of last week, we were back to a policy of do not go into the office unless you need to, do not attend client sites, and we've got to be mindful of that with the help of our staff to undertake that. So that's why I think this is going to be in for the long haul in terms of how we work and what we need to do when we get out of this. Is, as we do every year, is have a debrief about what worked well. I think that some things have worked well, what hasn't worked as well, and equally, there's been some challenges. The stuff that we've had to do on going concern, for example, is much more involved than it has been hitherto. It was kind of going that way, but it's and the council has responded, appropriately. But that was more onerous than it would have been when we took the outset of this. In terms of comments on changing chief financial officer, interestingly, my take is that the council as a whole's finance team is pretty stable. which is good because that's often of greater concern to me if you've got key people further down the finance team at chop and change. I've got some councils who've got huge instability in their teams, lots of interim staff. Simon's actually been in post, even though he wasn't section 1414. Simon, you'll tell me now, won't you? Be at least a year, fixed side of a year. Oh, if he's back on mute or not. Fixed side of a year, and therefore actually it's not been as big a change as you may have imagined in Chief Finance Officer, and we're very comfortable that Simon's got very, very good grip on what's been going on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Wilson just quickly wanted to come in on your points as well, Stuart, so I'll let her come in at this point now.
Yes, Stuart, thank you for your question regarding the Chief Financial Officer. I'd have to say that actually we've been extremely lucky. We've got a fantastic officer in Simon, who was with us before. We had it's been actually a really positive move for Derby to have, a Derby born and bred as it is chief executive who started his life as an apprentice at Derby City Council, who is now who is the chief exec, who was effectively Simon's boss previous and still is, but Simon has been here for over a year. He is probably the most stable pair of hands this city could possibly have, and in terms of his ability to work well with everybody in the department, I think I'd echo exactly what EY have just said, is that we have a really strong accounting team now. And actually it's probably the most stable we've been in numerous amounts of years. I think, bearing in mind we had, prior to Don, we had an interim. Prior to that, we didn't have a head of finance effectively. It was, we had numerous reports that were very negative. I'm really, really proud of where we've turned the accounts around for Derby City Council. So actually it's less of a worry and more of a positive for me.
Well, thanks, Councillor Wilson. I should say that he's an alumni of a great university as well, but of a particular great vintage of that university. If you wondered, he went to the same university as me, a year ahead of me, I should have had, but we didn't know each other there. We did totally different courses. But anyway, so the next one to come in is, I wanted to ask a question, is Councillor Dinser. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I'm heartened to hear Ernst Young say that they have got a good relationship with our senior team, and that's really positive. I just want to go back to Councillor West's comment earlier about how to proceed with the information we've been given in terms of, one, having time to look at the full report, although Lucy Kerr, as usual, has been able to do that very effectively. And two, because there are still outstanding matters which require confirmation, quite rightly, in terms of regulatory practice, and not assume everything is all fine, even though they may well be. And Simon's suggestion that we give delegated powers to him and the chair and the vice chair, I would assume, to sort of iron out or complete those bits of the outstanding items that were identified as not being able to give an opinion at this moment whilst those things are still outstanding. So I would support Councillor West's suggestion that, particularly since we have time, that any decisions are brought back to the committee. In the, I think I understand, 4th of November, we have a date when our next committee is, and that's still within the deadlines which have been set as a result of COVID-19 and delaying all sorts of things, including deadlines for audit reports and opinions. So I would support that, and we should take that on board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then Councillor Khan finally on this.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
I appreciate that these are unprecedented and difficult times, and that the auditors have had their own set of problems, as was mentioned, contacting staff, etc., etc. But I'm afraid their difficulties don't help us. As elected members, you know, of this committee, we have a duty to make sure that everything we sign off is read, understood, and any questions outstanding, any matters outstanding must be answered. And, you know, I think that just because we received the statement late doesn't mean that we as councillors have to sign it off early. You know, we have a month to go through this. 4th of November, we come back. If everything is okay, now there may be no questions asked on the 4th of November meeting, or there may be lots of questions asked, but it has given us enough time to have a look at this, study it properly, and come 4th of November, we'll be in a position where you as chair, Joanna as vice chair, and senior officers can say, yes, we're ready to sign this off. So I don't see the need to hurry it up simply because it's been presented to us, right? That is not what we do as a committee. What we do is look at things, and whatever we approve has to be for the betterment of the city, and not simply because we've received it, we sign it and get it over. I have no qualms about what Nicola said or what anybody else says about our officers. I think they're brilliant. The auditors, you know, may be brilliant as well. I don't know them, but we have a month, and I think we should utilise that before just simply signing this up. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think thank you very much, Councillor Carr. And I think that what I was going to suggest now, I know it's more appropriate on item 6, as Simon's put in the meeting comments, but I was going to suggest that on this one that we said something, and I'll see what other people think, but to say to note in recommendation to change 2.1 to note progress made on the audit and to receive the final version at the meeting on the 4th of November. Now, has anybody got any amendments to that or any comments on that proposal at all?
Hang on.
Chair, I'm as your section 151 officer.
Can you mute yourself, sorry, and let Simon come in?
Okay. As your section 151 officer, the decision, this report is to just note the ISA 260 from the external auditor, and for you to take that into account when you consider the accounts. The decision whether to defer should be the next item. I understand the comments being made, and I can advise on the next item.
Okay, but will we get the final version back if we were to delay the accounts? Will we get the final version of this back at the next meeting for us to note and review as well? I think that's the key issue here.
Right, there's two stages involved with this. There's the ISA 260 and there's the annual audit letter that you receive, which summarises the findings of the ISA 260. So Ernst & Young will be submitting a final ISA 260, which will give us their views and their opinions following all outstanding work. So yes, you will receive a further submission from Ernst & Young, and we will interpret it to the committee as appropriate.
Right, Councillor West, I think you wanted to make a comment on this. So,
thank you, Chair. Yes, that we take the recommendation at 2.1 on 7, therefore, to note the content of the letter and receive full ISA 260 audit letter at the meeting on the 4th of November.
yeah, sorry, I keep getting muted for some reason. Yeah, fine. Yeah, I think that's a good one. I think, did you want to come in as well, Councillor Kerr? And then I'm keen to move on, going in time.
No, I'm happy Joanna's covered it.
Okay, so is everybody okay with what Joanna suggested then? Nobody opposing that? Right, okay then, so we'll note that with Joanna's thing, and if we can move on to item 6 and then bring you in, Simon. Thank you.
I'm just unmuting myself, so thank you. Right, thank you. So this is the set of accounts, and just to give you the background to this, my team produced the accounts to submit to the auditors by the end of May, which was a really major achievement given the COVID situation. We decided that we wouldn't publish on the website until the 31st of July in order that we could carry on doing some of the QA, which is inevitably more difficult in the COVID world. So we issued it on the website on the 31st of July. So is what is called the draft accounts. And the inspection period was the 14th to the 27th of August, which we're required to publish, which we did. We have been working very closely with the auditors, and the amendments in the statements we can go through in detail if members want, but are briefly summarised in what Stephen from Ernst & Young has highlighted in his report. There were a couple of clarification issues that we need to be picking up as part of our lessons learned, but it had no impact on our bottom line revenue position. And to be honest, it's a fairly minor movements in the balance sheet classification, so nothing of substance. We subsequently have the situation, as Councillor West and others have highlighted, that we will not be able to say it's a final set of accounts, especially until we have had the pension fund audit, which we're not in control with, and until Ernst & Young and ourselves are satisfied that all the evidence has been produced for the valuation queries, which are still to be fully resolved. But I suppose there's a balance here that the accounts, I think I would say, and the auditors would say, are substantial or materially and substantially sort of complete. And coming back in the beginning of November will not necessarily be a major change from what we have at the moment. And given issues of financial sustainability and resilience across local government, it'd be very good for us to be publishing a position, especially the revenue position, of what our reserves are and what is our revenue position as soon as possible, and not to delay it to November, because that will give confidence to the city about our balance sheet strength and resilience and going concern going forward. So whereas it is in the remit of the committee to say that they could defer it to the beginning of November and do the formal sign-off at that point, I think there will be very few changes made to what we have at the moment. So I'm just asking whether, for the confidence of the city, we might be willing to exercise the delegation that is suggested in the report to myself and the chair to make any amendments post the audit completion. But that is obviously a decision for the Audit and Accounts Committee. On the call, I have Pete Chilcott, the Group Accountant, and Gemma Hadfield, the Principal Accountant, who are happy to take any questions. We also responded to a number of members and independent members' questions offline, and we did a member training session which was well attended, so thank you, where we explained the purpose and the detail of how the accounts are structured. So, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions with my colleagues, and it's eventually for the Audit Committee to decide whether they wish to defer this or whether they feel that they want to accept the report. And I can see the Vice Chair saying to reiterate her early recommendation to sign them off on the 4th of November, but that's a committee decision. So happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Simon. We do note your comments, but I don't know if anybody's got any pressing questions or queries on the accounts, but I think for myself, I'm the person that has to sign them as well. And really, for me to get assurances, I like to ensure that the committee that I have the privilege of chairing has that assurance as well, that, you know, about the accounts really. And so, you know, I'm not, on this occasion, I'm not happy to sort of necessarily take the delegation unless the committee is totally happy with that. And the message I'm picking up is that people on the committee would prefer to sort of get the final accounts in and to comment on that, and to have that sort of delegation. So, Councillor Kerr, have you got, bearing in mind time as well, with some people needing to sort of lead the meeting, have you got any, what are your quick questions you've got on it? Or could, if we're going to, we do vote to, maybe we take a vote to change the recommendation, and then if we are taking that, is there a possibility you could ask your question sort of offline, or is there any something you really want to sort of ask now to sort of get clarified or changed in the accounts?
I will try to be quick. Firstly, the reason for the Simon's just given us for signing off now is for the confidence of the city, and I would like to know why the confidence of the city about Derby City Council's accounts is significant.
Well, obviously you're aware that across the country, the Local Government Association and everyone else is saying that the impact of COVID on local government delivery and finances is significant. And if we can present a picture which is, this is our financial health as signed off as quickly as it can, then that's a fixed point in time that we can say the reserves that we have, the resilience that we have, the financial sustainability that we have is captured in the audited accounts. And that's what I'm saying here, that a set of accounts, for whether it be private or public sector, give confidence about that they show a true and fair view of the previous year. And that's what I was implying there, Councillor Kerr.
I don't think that Derby as a council and as an area, even though we think we're really important, I don't think from the perspective of the city we are make or break. So sorry about that. But I had another question, very simple thing, page 4, and it's just why this isn't the final papers. The financial performance heading is followed by the February 2019. The council agreed a net revenue budget for 1920 of 220.602 million, and in the table below it's clearly written down as 224 million. So it just seems to be a correction needed there. I have a question about what Erewash is doing for us on page 9 in terms of our borrowing. We have on page 7, sorry, I'm jotting about a bit, I don't know why. There's some unallocated capital receipts, and it was really whether there was reference about to unallocated capital receipts, and whether they are included in the table as unallocated general fund balance or in the capital reserves. And that really comes back to the question that I asked Stephen earlier about where capital can go. So I suspect that's part of capital reserves. And then the other thing I was going to ask is the impact of the business rates retention scheme actually had on us in terms of page 11. But I'm very happy if we answer all those questions offline, unless other people want to know the answers.
We'll collate all the questions together and see where we go. So I think Councillor Dinser, you wanted to have a question, and then Phil Sunderland. Councillor Dinser, are you there? I think you're on mute still by the looks of it. Hello, can you hear me? Councillor Dinser, did you have a question?
Sorry, Chair, I thought you were going through other people first. No, it's more a comment. I think Simon's point about the confidence in the city in a COVID-19 uncertainty is a fair point, but I think we have to also, as an audit committee, have confidence and show the resilience and scrutiny and due process. That will also give confidence, because in the past, historically, going back a few years, we were in not so clear position in terms of our robustness and our due process. So I know Simon's made a valiant effort twice now to get the sign off to be delegated and not bring it back to committee. But I think we will not be doing our job properly if we don't cross the T's and dot the I's properly using due process and the governance structure we have in the Audit and Accounts Committee. So I would still reaffirm Councillor West's suggestion and proposal, and what you also reaffirmed, Chair, to actually get all the work done, get all the things tied down, and then bring this back to our next Audit and Accounts Committee. So I just want to reaffirm that, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dinsey. Yeah, and we've got our recommendations in there, a combination, a joint effort between Councillor West and myself. Do you want to say something, Phil, at all? Phil Sunderland. Are you there? I think you're on the phone. Phil Sunderland, I think, wanted to come in. Are you there?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can, yes.
Yes. Councillor Crystal, I'm back. I was just on mute. And I'm curious on what EY's position is on this in terms of, I'm inclined to follow I think it's Simon's recommendation. Bear in mind, I'm not a qualified or trained auditor, but I am appreciative, our job is to scrutinise. But I'm curious on what EY's position is in terms of deferring effectively part-time position until the next meeting.
Next. Thank you. You can come in after that. Thank you. Phil Sunderland.
Hello, can you hear me, please? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I seem to know some quite detailed comments to the Treasurer, and they were answered very fully by Tony Nash and people from her team. It strikes me that the sort of questions that people are raising now are basically ones which are matters of detail. They're not relevant. They may be relevant in the detail, but they're not relevant in the materiality of the accounts themselves. So I can't see why either they should have been raised before the meeting and sorted out before the meeting, why they need to defer the signing off the accounts at the meeting. So that's just my point of view. I hope you get through to it. Thank you.
Thank you. So then, Councillor Crystal, you wanted to make a point as well about EY and EY point of view on this. Hello? Councillor Crystal there again now. So maybe
yes, I'm here.
So you want to make your point now? Thank you.
Yeah. So you've just asked the question for me. So appreciate what I think Philip just mentioned. But keen to understand EY's position on deferring these accounts. Ultimately, they're the paid specialists.
Okay. So it's going to probably sound like I'm sitting on the fence a little bit, but at one level, it is the Audit Committee's prerogative to decide at what point it wishes to approve or not these accounts, and therefore, if it has a strong view that it wishes not to approve them today but to approve them later, that is up to it, and that will be right and proper. Equally, in the context of what you've heard today, there seems to be a number of clear areas which we are getting confirmation on and clarity on, which may lead to some specific changes to the accounts or may not. So maybe a view would be that they can be approved subject to any material changes which either appear, which are not here, or which materially alter the nature of it. So, for example, say the pensions audit came back with a huge, big caveated material understanding in it, and we have to change all the disclosures in the accounts for it, your accounts for the nature of it, and that needs some explaining to members, then I could understand why they may want to understand that in more detail, because it would change. It may change the nature of it. So for me, I'm pretty relaxed either way. I think you can approve them subject to changes and have some delegation to the Audit Committee Chair, but with the caveat that those changes are in the areas we know, and there is nothing material that changes the accounts. That's how I may take it.
Right, thank you. So I think at this point, sort of getting a view on the overall committee. So I'm proposing now Councillor West has made a sort of proposal as well, that we remove recommendation 2.2 and we replace the recommendation with 2.1, which is, as it's been put into the message comments box, to note the latest progress of the accounts presented at this meeting and to await the outcome of the Derbyshire County Council pension audit and delay approval of the audited financial statement for the year ended the 31st of March 2020 until the meeting of the 4th of November, subject to all information being received. And I personally, as chair, have got to sign these off, would feel a lot more bearing in mind, appreciating the comments raised, and if this was a statutory deadline of today we were talking about, we may well consider that, but we're not. So we're not phoning the council any statutory deadline, so I feel a lot more comfortable personally as chair taking that course of action. So I don't know, should we proceed to take a vote on that, Steve, or is anybody in objection? Maybe you want to go around and just take a vote on that, Steve. Thank you. You have to manage this, don't you, Steve?
Thank you, Chair. Right, I've got a list of the councillors on the call, the call at the beginning. They're in no particular order, Chair. But if I just go through, if you're happy with that, member, and just get a vote from each of the members. So, Councillor Dinser, please.
I support the Chair's recommendation as stated.
Thank you. Councillor West, please.
Fully support it, Stephen.
Thank you. And Councillor Kerr, please.
Yes, I support the new recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson, please.
Yeah, that's fine, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bettany, please. Yes, I support the recommendation. Thank you. Councillor Shiraz Khan, please.
Yes, Alex, I support it fully.
Thank you. Councillor McChrystal, please.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, I don't see the point, but yeah, I'll support that.
Thank you, Councillor McChrystal. Councillor Adrian Pegg, please.
Yeah, I support recommendation.
Thank you. And so if I just count up, Chair, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's unanimous in favour of the supporting that recommendation.
Obviously record my vote in favour of as well.
Sorry, Chair.
Yes,
I apologise.
So that's agenda item 6 dealt with then, so we'll come back to our meeting in November. Sorry.
Thank you.
Bearing in mind we are approaching 12:30, so we've got a number of items. I know some people are having to dial off, and we've got some quite key things around. At least I think we can postpone number 12. I don't know what other people think, but I'd at least like to just get comments back on the annual report so as we can get that onto the full council agenda for, although admittedly, we could do it at the start of November and still get that on, but I don't know when the deadline is for full council. So I propose to at least to take that, but I don't know what other people's view are, whether they'd like to just run through the self-assessment exercise and the training, but I propose we don't need to do the Redmond review until November. What's other people's thoughts on that? Any comments?
Can I agree that getting the annual governance statements, the report from our committee is most important?
Yeah, okay. So do you want to just speak to that one then, Richard? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. This really is a report that demonstrates how the committee has discharged its function over the last municipal year, 2019 to 20. The report's been written in conjunction with the chair and vice chair, and it's been back to them several times. They're happy with the draft as it stands, and what they want is now the 4 members of the committee to have a look at that draft, say whether they're happy and whether they're happy for the chair to present this to full council.
Any comments then at all on that? Any comments in the committee? Yeah, Luke, Councillor Kerr, you wanted to comment on it?
Yeah, it's a small point which I think but something we should take up on. This includes a mention of our terms of reference, and the bottom of the terms of reference gives the date of when it was last reviewed as November 18, and the document also comments that our terms of reference should be reviewed annually. We're coming up to nearly 2 years since we looked at that, and I think we ought to have that on our work programme. And I think we probably ought to state in our report that we have it on our work programme to do.
Okay. I don't know if that's fine with that, if you're okay with that. I think we also had Phil Sunderland wanting to come in as well.
I really want to come in on the Redmond one. There's a couple of paragraphs missing at the end of the summary.
Okay, fine. We'll come back to you then. Did you want to speak on this, Councillor Ginzer, then? Were you typing something in, Councillor Ginzer? Did you want to speak on this at all? Or? I don't know. I don't think you're on mute, Councillor Ginzer. If you want to speak away, can you hear me? Oh, okay. He's saying he's had to leave. Sorry, that's fine. Okay, thanks, Councillor Ginzer. But we can maybe get your comments on some of the training later then, if that's okay, Councillor West. We can get his view. We can get his view later then, and we'll just sort of finish. I think we'll be quite quick on the remaining ones. So if there's no other comments on the annual report, with Councillor Kerr's amendment and to add that to our work programme, and I think myself and the Vice Chair, along with you, Richard, will decide whether we bring it to the next meeting or January or March's meeting. We'll decide that when we meet, when we next meet. But otherwise, are we okay to take that those two recommendations? Anybody object? Right. Okay. So the next one is again yourself, Richard, which is the self-assessment exercise.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, this was done, as we know, at the February meeting. After the February meeting, we should have reported back into the March meeting, but unfortunately the pandemic took over. I've put together, as you can see in Appendix 1, the responses I had from six members of the committee, and from that what I've drawn up then is some ideas of what the committee might like to consider as actions going forward to improve the effectiveness. And I've detailed them in 4.4 of the report, but also then moved them into Appendix 2 into the previous action plan. And it's whether that action plan is still relevant for members of the committee to consider the previous actions arising from the self-assessment we did in 2017-18, and then add in the ones from the current self-assessment that we did in 2019-20. And hopefully, take this action plan forward. So really, it's for members of the committee to just feed back on their thoughts on this.
Right. So, any thoughts at all from committee members then?
Quickly, Chair, please. Just to thank Richard for his work. Sorry, let me turn my camera on. Just to thank Richard for his work in this, but also just to stress, share disappointment that only 6 members of the committee managed to complete this task. It's for our own benefit, it's for the benefit of the committee, and it's for the benefit of the council and the city as a much wider sort of implication of that. And it is disappointing that only sort of 6 members of the committee shared their feelings on that. But thank you, Richard, for your work.
Absolutely, thank you. I echo that, Councillor West. And Councillor Kerr, I think you wanted to come in with a few questions.
Just 2 actually, and I'm not sure either's a question. The first one is to thank Richard and the team for actually putting together the action plan, because I think that that action table at the back is the one that we really need to continue to work on. And thank you for including the other actions on there. So really, I think I want to say that officers, please encourage and enable us to do the relevant training and etc. So push us, please, because sometimes we need pushing. And the second thing is that obviously the membership of this committee changes from one year to the next. So I think if we are doing training sessions, then I think they should be open to all members of the council. I don't expect everyone to turn up. I'm sure they won't turn up, but people who are interested in our work and the ability to scrutinise the things that we scrutinise, I think it would be helpful for them to be aware of that. So 2 points there.
Well, thanks, Councillor Kerr. I think that's a good point to note that, it should be open, particularly with the current Skype world, for people to come along to. So if nobody else has any other comments on the annual report other than just to note the action plan and to carry that forward as an action plan, and maybe we can make sure we track that in the future outstanding resolutions, if that's okay with everybody. If there's no other comments, I propose any other comments on that?
Chair, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to check because I was under the impression that all members were invited to audit and accounts training with the following on from this period, if you like, this financial year, as now all training is open to everybody because it has been online training.
Well, thanks for that clarification, Councillor Wilson. Yeah, should no reason why we shouldn't just do that anyway. Yeah. So if there's no other comments on our annual report, I think it's to note it and to really to add, I think, to thank Richard for his work, to echo the views of the committee, and to add that action plan to our outstanding resolutions to make sure we track them at future meetings. So thanks for that, Richard. And so if we come on now, that's on item 10. If we come on now to 11, and if I can speak on this, we based out of that self-assessment exercise, we've identified a number of training areas which are particularly highlighted at 4.5 as a suggestion for external for sort of training that we can receive from the remainder of this year. We've got external audit, we've got fraud risk, and we've got internal audit as well. And I think on that previous one there was various issues identified, training needs identified in terms of various SIP for position statements as well. So it's whether, I think on that, Richard, whether you could just send out a sort of email to all committee members just to clarify what those SIP for position statements are, so we could deal with the sort of training on those, around you doing that as well. But are there any additions or any comments on what we've sort of proposed and come up with in 4.5 for training for the rest of this year, and then we can put together a programme after that? Any comments at all? Anybody at all?
May I just ask whether Richard and Simon think that these topics will cover all the things that we are lacking in confidence in at the moment?
I think we have an experienced committee, so I think this is building on the assurance knowledge that you have. So yes, I'm satisfied.
I agree with Simon. I mean, there's plenty of scope within these for us to develop those areas.
And Richard, you're okay to send out where those people in the previous item we discussed, the self-assessment exercise, that said about the comments on SIP for position statements, then you can just send round a sort of email around that, can't you? So,
I can, Chair. It's one of the ideas I've got for one of the actions on there about the handbook for audit and accounts members. It can all be built into that as well.
Cover that in that. That's brilliant then. So that's so if we're okay, we'll do. We've got, it conveniently fits that we've got 3 meetings remaining this year, so we can work out one of those at each of the meetings. Now, how about that for a brilliant plan, eh? Baldrick couldn't have thought any better, could he? That dates me as well, of course, Blackadder. But so
yeah, could
finally,
I just comment on 4.5, please?
Pardon?
Could I just make one more comment on 4.5, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor West. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to say, because we only had 6 members of the committee submit their responses to Richard for the previous item, And it does say at the bottom of 4.5 that members are asked to consider other potential areas for training and development. Just to reiterate, I suppose, to the committee that there's no there are no negative connotations to asking for training, and if training is requested throughout the year because something comes up, that is absolutely acceptable, that the training is there to make the committee better and stronger, and that any requests for training would be considered and delivered where possible.
Yeah, absolutely, brilliant. And of course, I would encourage people. Richard sent out a sort of self-training exercise, and you're asked to mark yourself against that and to identify any areas. I don't know what response we've had on that as yet, Richard, but
I've had three responses to that, Chair.
Exactly. Okay, well, there's 8 of us, so we need five more to respond on that, and then we can at least get some feedback. But I think if we're all in agreement, we'll propose on the basis, take the recommendation that we'll determine 2.2. We'll take the recommendations in 4.5, and we'll take the recommendations as printed if we're all okay with that. And bearing in mind what Councillor West has said as well, please do contact Richard yourselves to if you really think you need some training on something else. But thanks very much. So finally, is it worth? I know you had some comments on some missing items. So what I'll propose to do on this last one is for you to present and review, Richard, and then also for Phil to fill in the gaps after Richard has finished. I'll just let you come in straight away, Phil.
Yep, thank you, Kevin. It's just right at the very end of after paragraph 22. There's a half a paragraph missing from the final report and the final paragraph. The final paragraph deals with small audits. That's not important, but there's just a slight difference at the end, and it does reflect on something called financial resilience and the need for financial resilience to be reviewed as part of the audit, but part of a future arrangements. Just a matter of it. That was a matter of information. And also, tomorrow there is a meeting with Tony Redmond. Is doing a phone webinar, I think it's called, with questions about the report. I will be attending on behalf of my wife, who asked questions, who's involved with the police audit committee. So, is there any questions that we want to ask him? Let me know what they are. But I mean, I can think of a few, but I can do that myself. That's just for information. The meeting is tomorrow, Tony Redmond.
Well, thank you very much. Same here, because both Councillor West and myself, one of the officers are Richard or Simon are going to that as well. But Councillor West and I are planning to go to that as well. But Richard, I don't know if you wanted anything else to say about this in general, just to explain the context at all.
No, I appreciate what Philip's saying. Yeah, it has missed the last. Unfortunately, when I've picked it up, it has missed the last line of recommendation 22 and missed recommendation 23 completely. I can apologise for that. I can send out a revised set to everybody, all councillors. No, really, I just included this purely to keep you updated on issues that, as a committee, you need to be aware of because it affects local audit.
Yeah. Brilliant. So thanks very much for that. It's useful to note it, and I certainly read through it. Has anybody got any queries or comments on that at all as well? Or any, bearing in mind what Phil said, any questions on it as well? Or, that you would like us to bring up at the meeting with the man who wrote it, I guess, tomorrow. And we'll certainly bring them up. Any comments at all? So I think Councillor West, you've dropped off again, so you're back again. Yeah? I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, but
no, just to agree with the comments that Councillor Kerr has just put in. If we can update the details on our paperwork on the website, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, brilliant. Yes, that's good. We'll do that then. So otherwise, the recommendation here is just to note this report that's been brought by Richard. And if anybody thinks of any questions they'd like us to bring up in the meantime, then just sort of email email myself or Councillor West, and we'll bring them up on your behalf. So otherwise, thanks very much for everybody attending today. We got through it in 2 hours. It must be one of the shortest committees ever, which is quite good, bearing in mind the technical problems. I gave when I thought how long we take, I sort of gave around 12:30 as a sort of rough finish time anyway. So thanks very much for their attendance today, and thank you for your forbearance with the technical issues, and thanks for taking part, and thanks very much to everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Chair.